Hey everyone, Pratik here, back with another video. So, welcome to my CyberTalk series. This is a really special episode. Today I will be talking to Casey Ellis, the chairman, founder, and CTO of Bugrowd. As a security researcher, I truly admire his work and I'm obliged with him with us today. So, welcome sir to my YouTube channel. And first of all, thank you so much for taking time out and joining me on my channel. I am very honored to have you as my guest.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
First question is, what are the challenges in running a crowdsourcing platform like Bugrowd?
Well, I've been doing this now for coming up on 9 years, and been in the security space since long before starting Bugrowd. I think the challenges that are specific to running a crowdsourcing platform, you've got to herd a lot of cats. There's a lot of people that on the customer side and on the hunter side, they've all got their own opinions, they've all got their own certain skills, they've all got their own points of view, and ultimately our job in the middle is to try to help them understand each other in a way that allows them to pass information back and forth and create value, right? So that is just a fundamental challenge of the space itself, I think. And it's good because, I think Bugerowd and the crew, my co-founders and I, we recognized the need for that pretty early on in the piece, and we've always tried to focus on that. But it's a never ending thing. Vulnerabilities aren't meant to be there in the first place. There's different levels of understanding of the fact that that's true. So our job is to try to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So the second question is, what strategies do you employ to onboard it to bug bounty programs, and who approaches first?
So when you're talking about onboarding, you're talking about building the business or new customers or new hunters, or which one? Which one do you want to talk about first? Because there's a lot of answers to that question, I think.
Yeah. Totally. Like as a VAPT or the bug bounty program. So how you approaches to the company to onboard the bug bounty platforms on a Bugrowd? So who approaches first, like Bugrowd or the company? That whole process I want.
Yeah, it's a combination of both. I think. In the early days, it was all about, us going to companies. Like I started my career in security as a pen tester. Yeah. Did that for about 6 years and then moved into solutions architecture and sales. Did that for a bit and decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And eventually, Bugrowd kind of popped out of that, right? So in that time, what I'd done was built a reputation and trust and credibility with folks that I then went to with the idea that Bugrowd was delivering into, and basically asking them if it made sense to them, if they wanted to try it out, and to actually engage with the process. So that was, I'm again talking about 8 years ago at the very beginning of it. The thing that shifted over time, bug bounty and kind of the power of the white hat community, it really got almost like a tailwind. Like if you think of it like in sailing terms, when you got the wind behind you, that wind kind of came up, maybe 2 years in, and all of a sudden bug bounty was a thing that everyone was talking about and trying to understand and wanting to do. So at that point in time, it became a mix of both. Like we'd be reaching out to organizations saying, hey, do you want to try this? And then we had people, picking up the phone and calling us as well.
I see some of your videos on YouTube. You're a very keynote speaker and some of the conferences also. You are also like you're also doing a bug bounty in your times?
Not as much as I'd like to these days. Like I think the thing that's like part of what I had to do, I've run businesses prior to Bugrowd, but Bugrowd was the first company I've been involved in that's had venture capital and grown in the way that it has. And I think, what that's really put in front of me is something to learn is, how to be a good executive. Like, how do you be a good leader? How do you, grow a team? How do you manage capital? How do you, do all those kind of business things, which takes away from my time on the tools, like being able to, hack on stuff and whatever else. So I spend a lot of time. I think what I spend most of my time on that is kind of as technical as it can be now is working on policy. Like I'm a big believer in the fact that hacking should be something that's better understood. Like a lot of the laws that exist around computer hacking, they don't really understand the idea that there's this concept of a locksmith, like people that can do bad things but want to help, right? It's all based on, if you can break into a computer, you're automatically a bad person. So I spend a lot of time on the policy side trying to influence that and change that. And I do a bit of like threat hunting and like honeypot stuff. Like when there's things that happen on the internet where the bad guys are going out and doing widespread kind of new hacks, I get interested by that and jump into the middle of that. So I'm involved in like the CTI League and people defending against people that want to take advantage of COVID and stuff like that. So that's how I keep myself sharp. But yeah, I don't actually do as much actual vulnerability research at this point in time as I'd like to. I definitely did a lot more, back in my day.
Okay.
Then I get to work with people like, like Hack Luke, who I think you had on the other day, and like Kadingo and Haddix and folks like that. Like, Vortex, like these incredible folk, like they're gifted and they want to learn more, they want to teach more, and they're really good at what they do. And like, I kind of get to, sort of almost through osmosis, pick up some of the things that they're learning along the way, which is pretty great as well.
Yep. Okay. So the next question is how you decided to start a career as an entrepreneur in Infosec. So that too as Bugrowd, and initially people will think to offer a pentasting services or a bounties, but why a crowdsourcing platform?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, in terms of the decision to become an entrepreneur in the first place, honestly, I just thought I could. That's really what it came down to. I'm like, you know what? I think I could probably do this. Like I've got ideas. I can sort of see where things are going and what's going to be needed in the future. And I feel like I can build those things ahead of time in a way that's going to create value and solve problems. So, now I want to see if that's true or not. So it was almost like this, self-competitive thing that kind of drove me to become an entrepreneur in the first place. With crowdsourcing itself, like the big thing, the company I was doing prior to Bugrowd was a pen testing company. And the way that we operated was basically, we had a bunch of resellers in Australia, where I'm from, that could sell this type of work and that needed to be able to deliver this type of work, but didn't have the people to do it. So in the meantime, I had all these friends in other parts of the world that were really highly skilled, but weren't connected to the opportunities in Australia. So what I did was to spin up a pen test company that basically white labeled their services through these resellers to kind of make up for the skills gap in the Australian market. And the thing is that skills gap exists everywhere. It's not just an Australian problem. It's one in the US, it's one in the EU and all around the world. So that was great. That was working really well. But it left me with this kind of nagging sense of like, it's not good enough. Like one person, when you think about what we're doing, there's like millions of people writing code and producing software and making decisions about how systems are built. And like humans are really awesome at a whole bunch of stuff, but we're not perfect. And sometimes when we make a mistake, it creates a vulnerability. So, okay, that's our problem space. But then you've also got this like huge crowd of potential adversaries that want to take advantage of that to find a way to break in. And like, build the pen tester in the middle, or Jane the pen tester, or the scanner, or whatever you're doing to try to, stay ahead of that, ultimately can't outsmart all of that human firepower and that creativity that's, that problem in the first place. So it was really this idea of like, how do we level the playing field? If there's millions of white hat hackers all around the world that are pretty much at the table waiting for an invitation, how do we plug them into the problem? Yeah. Like, how do we actually get them active and becoming a part of the solution?
Okay. And so the next question is, what makes a Bugrowd different from other such platforms?
Yeah, I think I get asked that one a lot, and honestly, we've really focused on being thoughtful of all of the people that are involved. You asked me the question before, like, what's the hardest thing? Yeah. And it's this idea that like, there are humans involved, right? Like you've got at the end of the day, you've got a bug hunter that's reported an issue. You've got, a program owner or even an engineer on the other side that's trying to interpret that issue and figure out if it's valuable or not. And there's all sorts of different ways that can go down. So like, how can we as a company make that as consistent and as like likely to succeed as possible? And we've been thinking about that right since the get-go. So, there's something to be said for like abstracting all of that and just saying, cool, this is how the platform works, just deal with it. We kind of chose the other road and really put a lot of work into making it successful. So there's that, and that's a core principle. We were first to market, which is another one. Like, we're actually the first to launch a bug bounty program, so that's something that I'm pretty proud of. Having kicked off an industry that's now definitely not going away. But the other thing would be that, like, I don't see bug bounties as the end of the story. I think the way that people think about this space is just that, you put a reward out, so people show up, you find out where you're vulnerable, they get paid, you fix it, and you move on. Ultimately, I actually see what we're doing as a component of the future of work. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, security is this very big, like, growing distributed problem. And there's all of these people that have their own creativity and ability to help. Like, how many other ways can we plug that in? And that's a problem that we've been trying to solve since day one and extend into. So I think that's something that actually makes us different, because I don't see any of the other platforms actually doing that.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is, how has the COVID affected the program policies on Bugrowd? We don't see much difference in payouts through. So has it affected Bugrowd in any way?
Yeah. So policies, I'm thinking about what you're asking there. What I would say is that, what we've seen on the customer side is some companies have like put their foot on the brake, and some companies have put their foot on the gas, right? So some have said, okay, like, the importance of the internet to our core business, like COVID, if anything, like reveals that, and we need to move faster. And they've gotten more active in trying to find ways to put the crowd to work to help them do it securely, right? And then you got this other camp that have been like, oh my God, there's a pandemic, there's a economic like uncertainty and all those different things. And reasonably, I'm not saying they're wrong. Like, I think it's actually quite reasonable, but they're in a different camp. They've kind of put their foot on the brake and said, wait a sec, we need to figure out how this is all going to shake out before we can take the next steps, right? So that's on the customer side. I think on the hunter side, really what we've seen, and we've put out some stats around this as well, like, there's been in general a huge uptick of people participating. There's been more submissions, more active researchers actually submitting bugs. And I would say that the criticality is increased as well. And I think that's partly because, people have more spare time. They're not commuting 2 hours a day to and from work. They're thinking about how to take better control over their livelihood and their career. And this is something that's, merit-based. So if they can be successful, do it. There's a whole bunch of different things, but, COVID in general for me, like, not to downplay all of the loss and the pain it's causing, because it's an objectively bad situation for a lot of people. And I feel very fortunate to be, and honestly, for anyone in IT to be in the place that we're in right now, because we're doing fairly well. Not to downplay that, but what it's done is it's really kind of highlighted how critical technology is as a part of the future of how we do most things. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, we're doing this over Zoom right now, which allows you to be in where you are specifically, and for me to be somewhere else. Like, this is just a normal part of how most people do everything today. And that wasn't true 6 months ago, right? So, there's all of these different examples where it's really reinforced the fact that technology is actually a linchpin in how we do life, which means that we need to secure it. We need to make sure it's safe. And that's, obviously helping us and helping like the mission that we've got as an organization.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, what motivates you? Example, like the technical challenge, an overall problem, or the helping the world, etc.
Oof, what motivates me? I love the idea of, what I tend to do is I find things that I either decide or, I go through, I grew up the child of a science teacher. So, lots of physics, lots of like math and all that kind of stuff. So I'm naturally fairly analytical, right? What I'll try to do is boil everything down to its simplest truth. And if I feel like that's something that is inarguable, like you can't argue with it and win, then that becomes the principle that I operate from going forward, right? Those things motivate me. So, I think fundamentally, I'm super passionate about the pursuit of potential. Like I think everyone's got greatness. Everyone's got their own giftings and their own kind of, contribution they can make to humankind in them, including me. And I'm motivated about unlocking that in myself and also like helping others unlock that in themselves too. There's a lot of things. Like I'm fairly stubborn, like if I see something that I think should be a certain way, for the sake of it being like the right thing for everyone who's involved, and I'll tend to dig my heels in on that type of thing and just push on it. So there's a lot of different things, but I think that whole idea of like pursuit of potential and just, going for it because I believe I can, and want to find out, that's something that really gets me out of bed in the morning. Okay.
That's a great answer. And the next question is, have you ever failed at anything? If so, how did you handle it? And what did you learn?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, totally. Like Bugrowd is an overnight success story that was 20 years in the making. You know what I mean? Like I've made all sorts of, decisions like well-intentioned and with the best information I had at the time that turned out to be not quite right. For example, I did a startup with my wife, just shortly after I quit my job and decided to become an entrepreneur, where we wanted to create an analytics platform for people selling stuff on eBay. Because I was doing at the time, I'm also a musician, so I was importing gear and doing things like that. So that was kind of what grabbed my attention at the time. And, I didn't factor in the fact that eBay might want to do that at some point. So eventually they did, and it completely, they broke my platform. They took it over and did it themselves. And at that point I was left with nothing. Like the value of that project pretty much went to zero overnight. And that wasn't their fault. It was actually my fault, because what I didn't do was factor in the risk of that when I was building the business to begin with. And I also didn't really talk to them. Like if I'd have reached out and started connecting with eBay and built a relationship as I was building the platform, then, maybe they would have acquired that business instead of just basically shutting it down by doing it themselves. So that's a failure. Like that's objectively a failure because it didn't work out as a company. But what I learned from that was a bunch of stuff that I've since used, in other ventures and in Bugrowd, right? So I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's not a straight path ever. Do you know what I mean? Like anyone who's ever been successful at building a business or at starting an idea and having it grow, the further along you get in that journey, the more of these stories of decisions that you'd wish you'd made slightly differently kind of pile up. And the trick is, do you bounce back from that? Do you, get back on the horse? Do you learn from it and try not to repeat it again in the future and all of that? And I think that's a universal truth when it comes to success. Like there's only so much you can learn in school. Do you know what I mean? Like when you actually put it into action, that's when, the chaos and the opinion of the world and the market come into play, and you got to work out how to adapt to that. And that does involve failure, which if you're afraid of it, you're probably not going to succeed in the first place, right? You've got to be able to actually move forward.
Yeah. Okay. So next question is it possible to build a widely successful company without burning out or damaging other parts of your life like a family, health, or etc.?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a really good one too. I believe it is. I think the business history and the internet is littered with stories that will tell you that it's not possible. I don't believe that's true. Like one of the things that happened, we got Bugrowd into an accelerator program, kind of like Y Combinator, but in Sydney, it's called StartMate. And as a part of that, I got introduced to all of these successful entrepreneurs and other people that I then engaged as mentors, right? And what I noticed was a lot of them were divorced. A lot of them were on their second or third marriage. A lot of them were estranged from their kids. And that's not a diss on them. Like sometimes that just happens, right? But what it forced me to think about was like, how do I prioritize, my wife and two kids against my business and figure out how to maintain balance between those two things? Because if I don't do that, naturally the business will just grow and try to consume everything. And I'll end up, damaging my family, as you say.
Yeah.
And it was actually that was a really good lesson, because it was like, okay, again, not judging those folk, but using that as a kind of forcing moment for me to think about how I was going to approach that. So to your question, like, is it possible? I think it is, but you have to be very deliberate about it, because when you do a thing, and when that thing starts to grow and expand, it's the same with a podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're creating content. All of a sudden, that becomes like wildly successful, and it becomes all you want to do at the expense of everything else. That's just what will happen. So you have to decide whether or not other things are important, and if they are, how are you going to balance that out? It's something that you've got to continually revisit and always be mindful of, I think.
Yeah. It's totally true.
Always just get started, but then know what your priorities are.
Yeah.
Like know what your priorities are. If it's cool, I want to do this thing, but I'm not going to sacrifice these other things, then learn how to keep them in balance and actually start to build the discipline into how you operate that gets you all of them. Because the alternative is that you just let your family fail and focus on your business, and maybe it'll work, because like that's what a lot of people do, and it is a viable choice. It's not the choice I'd make, but there are a lot of examples of that working, right? So it's one of those things where I think early on, almost like taking a moment to list out the things that are most important to you, and then figuring out how you prioritize. And I think the thing off the back of that is that, if you decided that family is important, and your family starts to become, difficult to manage because you're so wrapped up in business, it actually is a pretty good barometer for how you're doing as a manager and as a leader in your business. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, cool. I've decided that I don't want to compromise my family for the sake of my business, but I'm doing that anyway. Am I being mindful about my business? Or am I actually creating like points of risk or points of lack of scalability or whatever in what I'm trying to build? So it's a journey. Yep. But the simple answer is yes. I think it can, but it doesn't happen by mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question: if you had to come up with 3 words to describe the culture you want to create, and what would they be?
Where?
Okay.
The culture where? So you're talking about within the company, or just in general with hackers, or?
General with hackers.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a really good question. I think empathic.
Okay.
So empathy, like actually thinking about the other person, not just what you're thinking about. I think humble. In the sense that the things that you're good at, but you also know that you don't know everything.
Okay.
And you allow, like, that's, humility allows empathy. So those two are tied together.
Yep.
And I think the third would be optimistic. Like, all right, we all want the internet to succeed. We like it. We're using it right now to do this. Like people that are listening to this are using software and a whole bunch of platforms to do that. We'd all like that to continue. So, we also know that there's a bunch of stuff that's broken.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to become pessimistic. So how do we choose to be optimistic and actually always be working towards a solution and a future instead of just getting stuck at the broken stuff, if that makes sense? So
That's a great answer. So almost the question is all over. Okay. So I guess, guys, that's it for today. I would like to thank Casey Ellis for joining this CyberTalk and sharing his knowledge and experience with our audience. It will be surely help us in future. It was an honor to host you, sir. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, as I said before, pleasure to get the invite. It's always a pleasure to talk. For the hunters out there, you are the internet's immune system. It's an incredibly exciting space. Something that I didn't mention while we were talking is that in my 20 years of cybersecurity, you know, people didn't really care about what we do in the way that they do today, up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it's a really exciting time to be joining in the fight to make the internet a safer and a better place. And, you know, I appreciate all of you getting involved.
Yeah,